Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Hagan. This is Next in Sales, a next level podcast. I'm so excited to introduce y'all to my special guest today. I've got Matthew Farina, who is an enterprise account executive from Miro with me today. Matt, thanks so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Like we were just talking about, it's Friday. It sounds like you got a big weekend ahead of you. So hard to complain on days like these, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Matt, I would love if you could give a little bit of background on yourself, just so the viewers can get to know you a little bit better first before we dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. And my understanding is, Anna, kind of your audience is kind of in tech and SaaS, or at least interested in that space. That's a space that I have been in for a long time now. I was actually really fortunate enough to get exposed to the software and technology space actually back in high school. So where I grew up in Florida, kind of the town that I was in, Gainesville, go Gators, for any UF fans out there. But they had a very big entrepreneurial hub that started exposing me to tech startups at a young age. So I was actually fortunate enough to kind of get into that business or that vertical young. And it's something that has kept my attention ever since. So here I am now. Getting close to the dirty 30, as they say, but with a lot of experience under my belt, and happy just to share any of my learnings with your audience, right? So maybe they don't make some of the same mistakes I did.
Right. Well, and you helped found two different sales segments at Miro in just under 2 years. What has that been like?
It's been an insane ride, and obviously I'm very proud of what we've accomplished, as a team and as a company at Miro. The last couple of years that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of the organization, you can see that I'm proudly rocking some Miro swag on this call. But Miro is an organization, that has been around long before I joined. It's just kind of with the onset of COVID, right, and the new future of work and kind of the digital transformation, collaboration and productivity tools like Miro have been insanely popular. So it's been one of those dynamics where we've kind of been building the rocket ship as it's been flying, right? And that's very much the story of my life these last 2 years, helping found, the commercial and the mid-market space. But obviously, it's been very exciting. It's allowed me to build a ton of great skills and also work with some amazing people. So it's been a really fun ride so far, and I'm hoping that it continues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like they love you over there. So, it's interesting because you work at Miro, and Miro is a productivity tool.
Yep.
And how do you at Miro leverage data analytics and technology to drive better results across your sales org?
Yeah, really good question. And for anyone that's listening to this podcast that isn't super familiar with tech sales or software sales or just professional selling in general, I think something that we often miss, or maybe a misconception that I had when I was first kind of learning about the industry and getting into it, is you think of kind of that traditional sales view of to be a great seller, to be a great sales rep. You really just have to know how to talk eloquently, right? You have to be able to get onto a call like this, present yourself well, engage people in an effective manner, and ultimately have the confidence, right, to ask for the signature and get the deal closed. Even though that is part of it, right, and that's kind of the art of professional selling, there's also the science of it, right? And I think that's something that I didn't understand initially, and that's something that a lot of folks miss, that professional selling, and even more so tech sales and software sales, is both an art and a science. And I think the science part is where you start to learn how to leverage different technology and productivity tools to really make data-driven decisions, right? Yeah. And so I think for us at Miro, and something that I've learned just over the course of my professional selling journey, is that we as sellers, even if we're not super technically savvy, we shouldn't be afraid or shying away from those productivity tools that can help us make those data-driven decisions. And And that's something that's maybe a little uncomfortable for sellers to start, right? Because a lot of people say, "Hey, I got into sales because I'm not good at math or I'm not good at numbers." But the reality situation is to really be an effective seller, right? And to really have that two-pronged approach of the art of it, but also the science of it. You have to be comfortable with those data sets and you have to be comfortable with those numbers. So even very simply, right, what that may look like for me day to day from a data perspective is just using kind of different insights to understand what customers are kind of actively engaging with the content that I'm sending out versus what customers aren't engaging with that content. It's a very simple example, but it's one that I use because it's something that we all understand, right? Because obviously, if we're trying to build a relationship with someone and we are actively trying to engage them and they're not really responding or interacting with any of our efforts, then that means that it's probably not the best time and we should be focusing our efforts elsewhere because there's only enough minutes in a day. So when we kind of start to think about that balance, technology is obviously a huge part of that. So great question on your side.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I assume that Miro is your number one go-to productivity tool. What other tools and technologies have you used that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, so it's going to look different kind of based off of the tech stack at the company. And for those of you that may not necessarily be familiar with that terminology, tech stack just essentially means the different software, tools, and applications that you use every day for your job. So that's going to look different across different companies. But for me specifically, I really love the G Suite. And for some people, that may just be like a no-brainer. Like, of course you would use Gmail, or of course you would use Google Calendar. But those types of tools wind up becoming really helpful when you have a lot of things to keep track of and need to stay organized. So that's the other kind of big part of the science aspect of it, just organization. And then I think more on a deeper level, right? There's tools that we have access to that pretty much every, sales or go-to-market organization are going to leverage in terms of like an outreach for maybe automating some of your different email cadences, having access to advanced analytics on LinkedIn for researching different customer personas. Those are just a couple of examples to name a few.
Awesome. And so when you were helping to found these different market segments in sales at Miro, I know we talked about you've been kind of involved in the hiring process. And from your perspective, what kind of pain points do you think that hiring managers are seeing in today's market, especially when it comes to sales organizations?
Yeah, another really good question, Anna. And like you pointed out, kind of when we were first hopping on and going through intros, I'm operating as both kind of an operator and builder at Miro. And obviously part of the building component is finding the right people to, be a part of your team or be a part of your sales organization. So for anyone that is interested in pursuing a professional career track in sales or more specifically technology or software sales, just know that hiring managers and sales leaders and sales organizations are always looking for great sales talent. And I didn't even fully realize that until I read a statistic the other day that essentially said that within technology and software, other than product development or software engineering, the sales organization has the highest turnover typically than any other vertical within the business. So essentially what that tells people like you and I, Anna, is that there's constant turnover in sales and sales leaders are constantly looking to kind of fill those roles with new and up and coming talent. So essentially what leaders are looking for, especially in today's market, and if you are a listener and trying to understand how you can really differentiate yourself, especially if you already are going through an interview process with the company, is think about tenacity. And that's a word that may not be used a lot within the professional context. Maybe that's an adjective that we hear more in like a sports dynamic, right? Or a highly competitive environment. But anyone that's not familiar with tech, right, will figure out very quickly that tech sales specifically is a lot like sports, and it's very competitive. And anyone that comes from a sporting or athletic background knows that kind of the people that are willing to stick with it the longest typically have the most success. And so when we look at kind of the current state of tech today, and we also look at the 2023 economic outlook, this is not an easy time to be a tech sales professional. There's certain market conditions that are making it more challenging to be an effective seller, just as customers' buying processes are changing and as everyone is taking a closer look at operational expenses. So I don't say that to scare anyone away, but I do communicate that to let everyone know that it's not always easy being a seller. And so the folks that are tenacious and have the ability, right, to stick it out are the ones that I've noticed being the most successful over the course of my career. And even just as a quick example, one of the first ever professional selling gigs that I had was with a technology research and advisory company down in South Florida. And I remember when I first got that role, I was very much bottom of the barrel. There was 130 new hires. I had no introduction whatsoever to technology sales. There was a lot of people that came into that kind of cohort with a lot more experience and a lot more pure talent than I did. But over the course of my time with that company, I was able to essentially go from very bottom, last place, all the way up to the top 5 in terms of performers. And the way I was able to do that wasn't because I was more experienced or more strategic or more eloquent than my peers or my coworkers. In fact, I was not as good at those things as a lot of my other peers. But I just really wanted to be successful and I wanted to learn, and there wasn't anything that was going to stop me, right?
Absolutely.
And even during my time there, there was one afternoon, a Friday afternoon, where the company spent a bunch of money on a huge yacht to take all of us out, just out on the bay in South Florida. So amazing trip, right? Amazing afternoon. We had been talking about it for weeks. Everyone was really excited. And, that day I really needed to get a customer meeting for the seller that I was supporting at the time. And I hadn't gotten it yet. And as much as I wanted to go on that trip with all my friends and peers and enjoy that day out on the bay in Miami, right on the yacht, I actually wanted to stay in the office that day while everyone else went out. And I just kept making calls until I finally got that meeting right. And it was time to shut it down for the day. So when we talk about tenacity, I always tell that story to let people know that if you're starting off in professional selling or you're starting off in the tech space and you don't necessarily feel super talented, that's okay. Yes, you are going to need to grow in your skills, and I've had to grow in my skills, but ultimately it just comes down to how bad do you want it. And I think if you're able to show that to hiring managers or to sales leaders as you're going through a candidate evaluation process, that always speaks volumes because ultimately that's what's needed to really excel in this role and to ultimately contribute a lot of value to these organizations.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. And it sounds like a mixture of really like adaptability and tenacity is really what's going to help people go the distance.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a great way to describe it because yes, the tenacity has to be there. But like you said, Anna, there has to also be kind of the agility or the adaptability because it's okay to make mistakes, but obviously you don't want to be making the same mistakes twice. So if you're able to be resilient, right, and learn quickly from your mistakes and make sure that you're not making those same mistakes again, that just allows you to get really good really quickly. And that's something too that's really important that hiring managers will be evaluating. So definitely keep that in mind if you're listening to this.
Well, and during because you've been in sales for just a few years now, really, you're pretty young in your career and have had a pretty great rise. So, I think a lot of people that I've talked to in sales as a recruiter have all said, the hardest part about sales is pushing through rejection and just working through that every day. What is your advice to those who are starting out or who might be struggling with that, for how to push through all of the rejection that you face?
Yeah, so that's a great call out as well. And I think it acts as a nice segue to what we were just talking about in terms of tenacity and adaptability, because that's the other thing that makes sales so hard, right, is the rejection factor. And if we just kind of take a step back, right, and not even think about sales or the professional setting, as human beings, rejection in general just doesn't feel good, right? We've all been there, right? Where maybe we've tried to make a move on a crush and they haven't reciprocated, or we've applied for a job and we haven't gotten it, or maybe you have fulfilled some sort of sales role in the past, even if it was just door-to-door sales. I did that growing up and had a lot of doors shut in my face, and that was obviously tough, but I think what I'm starting to understand, and like you said, I haven't been in this game that long. I've been in it now for 5+ years, but I've been in it long enough to learn a couple of key lessons. And one of the things that I think has been really important for me going through this process is learning how to be humble and leave my ego at the door, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the secret to dealing with a lot of rejection and not letting it prevent you from progressing in your career. If ultimately your goal is to be a professional seller and to be a sales leader, you have to realize that at a certain point, the rejection isn't personal, right? Sure, there may be a time where you mismanaged the conversation with the customer and they didn't necessarily like that, right? And so they didn't respond to you super positively because of it. But a lot of the times, like, people have a million other things going on. So if you're cold calling them and trying to get their attention, or just trying to get some time on their calendar, or maybe you already have an existing relationship and you're trying to move a deal forward and maybe have like a quote review call or a legal negotiation call or something along those lines. And maybe you get on with the customer that day. And even though you've had really great conversations in the past, for whatever reason, they're just not super pleasant on that call. Like, that should totally be expected, right? Because sales is such a people sport that folks are going to just have tough days as human beings. And that's naturally going to carry over into their business conversations. And the reason why I say that is not to, knock on anyone that's having a tough day. We've all been there. I just think it's important to realize that business in general and sales more specifically is very much a people sport. And because of that, it has that human component. And so that's kind of the first thing that you just have to like surrender to as a seller, is like, hey, not only am I going to face a lot of rejection, but I'm going to face a lot of rejection even when it's not my fault, right? I could do my job perfectly, and still not get kind of my desired result, just because my customer, is having a tough day, or it's just not the right time. And so I think that's where I've really had to learn, right? Is it's not about me. It's not about Matthew. It's not about me looking good and closing the deal. It's about understanding, hey, what is it that the customer really needs? Can I help them? And then if so, how do they want me to help them, right? Because everyone kind of has a different working and collaboration style. So that touches a little bit on the rejection component, but great question.
Yeah, well, and I think it's all about, reframing the mindset. One of my former colleagues actually quoted this to me at one point, and he was just like, look at it like this. You have the opportunity to fail today. You have the opportunity to fail and learn from your mistakes today. And just because somebody rejected you doesn't mean that you did a bad job.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the whole thing, right? It's not I think ultimately what it comes down to, because you'll hear people talk about, pride and ego and humility. And those are all, words or terms that we're familiar, right? That we probably heard since we were little, either by a parent or a mentor in some situation. I think as we become adults, we have to start to think through, what does it look like specifically for me, to exude that principle or that ideal in this specific situation, whether it's professional or personal. And I think a lot of times those two worlds cross over more than we realize. And you see that a lot in sales. And so I think, again, that's why it's really important, not just to be okay with rejection in the sense of knowing that, hey, I'm not a terrible sales rep just because this one person didn't say yes to me, but also just recognizing too that, yes, you have to be good at accepting rejection, but even more so, you have to be good at just putting your agenda on the back burner. Because obviously we as the sales rep, we have that quota hanging over our head. We know end of quarter is coming. We want to look good in front of our leadership, and we want to look good internally. But sometimes to really do business effectively with customers and to really help customers the way that they need to be helped, you have to take all of your agenda items, put them on the back burner, and just come to the customer and say, how can I help you? And to shoot straight with you, I mean, those are some of the biggest deals that I've closed, right? When that's the type of relationship with the customer, because that's where you deliver actual value versus just pushing your own agenda and kind of making the customer play second fiddle.
Right, because when you put their interests before your own, that allows them to actually trust you and know that you're looking out for their best interests and you actually care about how your product is going to improve their day-to-day or their team's day-to-day.
Yeah, and I think the word that you use, trust, is super relevant, because I think when you start to approach customers and you start to approach business relationships in that way, where people can visibly see and feel that you legitimately care about them and you're putting your agenda on the back burner, that's what allows you to establish the trust. And trust is foundational to any sort of healthy and, I would say, lengthy business relationship, just like it's true on a personal level, right? You have to have some sort of trust. So I love how you put that.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, in your time in sales, I'm sure that you've come across a ton of amazing sales leaders and other account executives that you really look up to. Who are some of your favorite sales leaders or colleagues that you really look up to in the world of sales?
Yeah, so there's a couple of people that I can rattle off just kind of right off the bat. But I guess before I do that, just to kind of give some more context, because what I hear you asking, Anna, is hey, who are the thought leaders that have essentially helped me educate myself on sales? And, where can our audience go to access some of those same learning materials, since obviously they've been beneficial for me? That's kind of the question that I'm hearing. And it's actually a really good question, because technology sales and even professional selling in general is not something that is talked about a ton in the higher education system. Yeah. There are certain universities throughout the country that offer professional selling programs. So you can get an actual bachelor's or certificate in that. But if you're like me, the university that I went to didn't have any formal programs. I didn't even really know that professional selling existed as a career option until one of my mentors kind of flagged it up to me and said, hey, I think you'll be really good at this. But all of that said, for anyone listening to this that's trying to think about, hey, this discussion today between Anna and Matthew has been really interesting. I want to learn more. How can I learn more? One of the best places to start is to think about someone within your own network who may have a professional selling gig. That may not be true for everyone, but oftentimes we miss folks that are kind of already in this vertical who can be massive resources to us in terms of helping us understand what a career looks like and also where we can get started. So that would be the first way that I would kind of challenge your audience there and say, hey, look within your own network and see if there's anyone that you may have missed in the past that's actually already in this space. Yeah. And then obviously, if you don't have those personal connections, that's totally okay. I was fortunate in the sense that I had personal connections, but I also went and did a lot of my self-learning on my own, which I'm sure probably a lot of your listeners want to do. So in terms of just kind of individuals that you can immediately go to and start getting value from, there's a couple that I'll name kind of right off the bat. For folks that are kind of more interested in training and enablement resources for individual contributors, so just kind of day-to-day sales reps like myself, John Burroughs Consulting, he's kind of considered like the godfather of professional tech sales. He's been around for a long time and has a ton of free content available. A lot of it is tailored to ICs, right? And I'm just gonna let my dog out here really quickly.
No.
A lot of them are tailored towards ICs, so it's great for kind of newbies that are trying to ramp up. And it's a lot of just great kind of fundamental skill development, right? Which is really important.
Awesome. Yeah.
So for those that are looking for kind of the more fundamental basics of how to get started and how to really nail down the hard skills that are needed to really have a successful career in professional selling, definitely check out John Burroughs. If you punch his name in on Google or if you type in Better Sales by JB Consulting, his landing page will come up and there's a ton of free resources that are available. If you're listening to this podcast and you sit more kind of on the leadership or the executive side of the table when it comes to professional selling, if you're not already familiar with what Sam Jacobs is doing over at Pavilion, definitely do a quick Google search on him as well. Similar to John Barrows, Sam Jacobs is considered kind of another one of those godfathers of tech sales. He was one of the first thought leaders that I was exposed to. He has a podcast called the Sales Hacker Podcast, which is one of the first podcasts that I started listening to. And Sam interviews all of the top sales and go-to-market executives across the software and technology space. So if you're already kind of into your professional selling career, and maybe you want to better understand, how sales executives kind of think and operate at a high level, that's where Sam Jacobs' content is super helpful and relevant, just because it's a little bit more tailored to those higher level personas. So in terms of where your audience can go, those would be the two big ones that I recommend, John Burroughs and Sam Jacobs. And if you type them in on Google, they'll immediately pop up.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on here today. Matthew, do you have any last advice to share with our viewers before we wrap up?
The last thing that I would say is like, if you really, want to get into sales, it's not hard to get started. You just really have to want it, right? So I think that's the first thing that I would really encourage your audience is to go out and do some education and really kind of understand what they're getting themselves into. Because if you really like it, you can build an awesome career like I have. But at the end of the day, sales isn't for everyone. So it's better to recognize that on the front end versus the back end. And if you're still not 100% sure where you fall into that category, I have a lot of conversations with people every day where I kind of help them scope that out. So if you need some additional guidance in that respect, please feel free to leverage me as a resource. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Matthew Farina at Miro. And just send me a connection request, shoot me a DM, and I'm always happy to chat and pay it forward.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time today, Matthew. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. Again, this is Next in Sales, a Next Level podcast. And if you liked what Matthew and I had to say today, I'd encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share this with your friends, family, colleagues, and I'll see you next week.